My name is Gerald Monroe. I am 67 years old. My hands are rough. My back aches every morning when I get out of bed. My shoes are old, the kind that have been resoled twice, because I never liked wasting money on things that weren't broken yet. I drove a second-hand 2009 pickup truck for 11 years. I wore the same brown jacket every winter. I ate simple food. I lived a simple life. But I want you to know something before I tell you this story. I want you to understand who I am before you hear what happened to me. I am not a poor man. I am not a struggling man. I am a man who chose to live simply because I believed that money was a tool, not a god. I believed that what you build with your hands and your heart matters more than what you wear on your back or drive on the road. I believed that love was enough. I was wrong. And it took standing in the hot Texas sun, watching my own son muck out a horse stall on a ranch I paid for, while he looked right through me like I was nobody, to finally understand just how wrong I had been. Let me take you back to where it all started. I grew up in a small town in rural Oklahoma. My father was a farmer. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the north side of town. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we had dignity. When I was 19 years old, I got a job on a construction crew. I carried bricks. I mixed concrete. I worked in the freezing cold and the blazing heat. I saved every dollar I could. By the time I was 25, I had saved enough to buy a small plot of land. Then I bought another. Then I partnered with a man named Earl Hutchins, and we started a small land development company together. We bought undervalued land, improved it, and sold it. It was slow at first, very slow, but I was patient. By the time I was 40, our company had grown into something real, something meaningful. We had developed over 300 acres across 4 states. We had a team of 40 employees. We were worth, on paper, somewhere around $8 million. I didn't celebrate. I just kept working. I married my wife, Patricia, when I was 31. She was a school teacher, a quiet woman. A good woman. She had kind eyes and a laugh that filled whatever room she was in. We were not a flashy couple. We did not go on expensive vacations or drive luxury cars. We built a home together, not just a house. A home full of warmth and love and laughter. We had one son, Daniel. Danny, we called him, and from the moment that boy was born, I poured everything I had into him. Everything, not just money, not just things, but time, presence, conversations at the kitchen table, Saturday mornings fishing at the lake, long drives through Oklahoma where I told him about life and land and the value of hard work. I wanted him to be strong. I wanted him to be humble. I wanted him to understand that everything in life worth having was worth working for. I thought I had raised him right. I thought I knew my son. Daniel grew up handsome and smart. He got good grades. He went to a good university on a scholarship, something I was deeply proud of, not because I couldn't afford to pay, but because he had earned it. It was in university that he met Melissa. Melissa was beautiful. There is no other word for it. She had long dark hair, sharp green eyes, and the kind of confidence that filled a room before she even opened her mouth. She came from a wealthy family in Austin, old Texas money, the kind that comes with a last name people recognize. When Daniel brought her home for the first time, I shook her hand warmly and offered her a seat at our kitchen table. Patricia made her famous chicken pot pie. Melissa looked around our modest home and smiled. But it was the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. The kind of smile that says I am being polite. I noticed it, but I said nothing. Daniel was in love. And I loved my son, so I said nothing. They got married 2 years later. A big wedding. Melissa's family insisted. I offered to contribute, and they accepted, though her mother made sure to mention 3 times that their family was handling most of the arrangements. I smiled and wrote the check they asked for and said nothing. After the wedding, Daniel and Melissa moved to Austin. Daniel got a job at a real estate firm, fittingly, since he had grown up watching me deal in land. He did well, he had my instincts for it, but something else was happening too, something I couldn't quite name. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits became shorter. Melissa had a way of steering conversations, steering Daniel toward certain topics and away from others. I noticed that whenever I called on a Sunday evening, our calls were cut short. Dad, we've got dinner plans. Dad, Melissa's parents are here. Dad, it's not really a good time. I always said the same thing. Of course, son, you call me when you're ready. Patricia noticed it too. She would sit in her chair by the window after those short calls, and she would be quiet for a long time. One evening, she looked at me and said, "Gerald, do you think we're losing him?" I reached over and held her hand. "He's just building his life," I said. "That's what we raised him to do." But in my heart I felt it too. That slow, quiet pulling away, like a tide going out. When Daniel turned 35, I decided to do something I had been thinking about for years. I had always dreamed of owning a proper working ranch. Not just land, a real ranch, horses, cattle, open pasture, a big farmhouse with a wraparound porch, the kind of place where a family could put down roots, where grandchildren could run free, where life could slow down enough to be lived. I found it in central Texas, 380 acres of the most beautiful land I had ever seen. Rolling hills, a natural creek running through the south end, 2 large barns, a gorgeous 5-bedroom farmhouse that had been lovingly maintained, a full horse operation already in place, with 8 registered quarter horses. The asking price was $3.2 million. I bought it. I put it in Daniel's name. I did not tell him the full value at first. I invited him and Melissa down for what I called a family visit. I told him I had something to show him. When we pulled up to the gate and I handed him the keys and the deed, Daniel stared at the papers for a long time. Then he looked at me with wide eyes. "Dad, what is this?" "It's yours, son," I said, "yours and Melissa's. A place to build something real, something that will last generations." Daniel hugged me that day, a long, real hug, the kind I hadn't felt from him in years. He had tears in his eyes. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," I told him. "Just take care of it, and take care of your family." Melissa stood a few feet away, looking at the farmhouse with different eyes now. Not the polite, distant smile I was used to. Something calculating, something satisfied. I should have paid more attention to that look. Patricia squeezed my arm as we drove home. "You're a good father, Gerald," she said. "I'm trying to be," I said. 3 months passed after I gave them the ranch. I called once a week. Sometimes Daniel answered. More often it went to voicemail. Then 6 months passed. Then a year. The calls I received were mostly from Melissa, and they were always about something practical. An issue with the ranch's water permit. A question about the horse insurance. Once she called to ask if I could contribute to the cost of renovating the farmhouse kitchen. I contributed without complaint, but I was never invited to visit. Patricia's health began to decline that year. Nothing catastrophic at first, just the slow settling of age, arthritis in her hands, tiredness that didn't go away with sleep. Some days she didn't feel like getting out of bed. I cared for her quietly. I made her tea in the mornings. I read to her in the evenings. And on the days when she was feeling well enough, we sat on our small back porch and watched the birds come to the feeder she had hung from the oak tree. "Has Danny called?" she asked one afternoon. "Not this week," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Gerald," she said, "I want to see him. I want to see my son." I picked up the phone and called Daniel. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I left a message. Simple, calm, "Danny, it's Dad. Your mother isn't feeling her best lately. We'd love a visit when you get a chance. No rush. We love you." He called back 2 days later. "Dad, I've been so busy with the ranch. There's a lot going on. Maybe we can do something around the holidays." "Of course," I said. The holidays sound good. The holidays came and went. Daniel and Melissa spent Christmas with her family in Austin. We got a text message on Christmas morning. "Happy Christmas, Dad and Mom. Busy here but thinking of you. Love, Daniel and Melissa." Patricia read it twice. Then she set her phone down and said nothing. That was the moment something hardened in me. Not anger. Not bitterness. Something quieter and more permanent than that. A decision, and here I need to pause. Because what I'm about to tell you, this is the part of the story that changed everything. The part I never expected. The part that broke something open inside me and, strangely, set me free. Patricia passed away in February. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen making her tea. I brought it to her room, and she was gone. Peaceful, quiet, like she had simply decided it was time. I sat beside her for a long time, holding her hand. Then I called Daniel. He arrived 2 days later for the funeral. He came with Melissa and their 2 children, Luca, who was 7, and Sophie, who was 5. I had met the children only a handful of times. They looked at me with curious, uncertain eyes, the way children look at strangers. The funeral was small. Some of Patricia's former colleagues from the school, a few neighbors, my business partner Earl, who drove 4 hours to be there. Daniel stood at his mother's graveside and wept. Real tears. He held my arm. After the service, we went back to the house. And that's when it happened. I overheard them in the kitchen, Daniel and Melissa. They didn't know I was in the hallway. Melissa was speaking in a low voice, firm, certain. "Daniel, you need to have the conversation with him now. While he's emotional, it's the right time. Melissa, my mother just—" "I know, and I'm sorry, but we need to think practically. The ranch is ours. The deed is in your name. But the rest of his estate, he needs to update his will. Make sure everything is clear." A pause. "He's getting old, Daniel. He lives alone now. Who knows how long—" Stop. Daniel's voice. A longer pause. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'll talk to him." I stood in the hallway. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I simply stood there as the ground shifted beneath me. My wife was not yet cold in the ground, and my son and his wife were discussing my estate. I walked back into the kitchen with a calm face and said, "Who wants coffee?" In the weeks that followed Patricia's death, I did a great deal of thinking. I walked a lot. Long walks through the neighborhood in the early morning, when the streets were empty and the air was cool. I thought about my life. I thought about my choices. I thought about Patricia and the life we had built. And I thought about Daniel. I thought about the boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. The boy who cried at the kitchen table when his science project fell apart the night before it was due. And I sat with him until midnight, and we rebuilt it together. The boy who called me from university his freshman year because he was homesick and didn't want to admit it. So he just said he wanted to hear my voice. Where was that boy? When had he become this man? I called my lawyer, a sharp and thorough woman named Helen Graves, whom I had worked with for nearly 20 years. "Helen," I said, "I need to review some things." "Of course, Gerald," she said. "Do you want to come in?" "Yes, and Helen, be thorough. I want to look at everything." What I discovered in those meetings changed the picture entirely. You see, what Daniel and Melissa did not know, what almost no one knew, was that my business had continued to grow quietly over the years. Earl and I had sold our development company 5 years earlier for a very significant sum. I had then invested carefully, methodically, in commercial land and agricultural property across 3 states. The ranch I gave Daniel was worth $3.2 million. My total estate, as Helen laid it out before me, was worth considerably more. Considerably more. I looked at the documents, then I looked at Helen. Let's make some changes, I said. 6 months after Patricia's funeral, I decided to visit the ranch. I did not call ahead. I did not announce myself. I drove my old pickup truck the 4 hours to Central Texas on a warm September morning. I wore my usual clothes, worn jeans, a plain flannel shirt, my old work boots. I had not shaved in a few days. I looked, I suppose, exactly like what I had always looked like. A plain, older man. A working man. When I turned off the main road and came up the long gravel drive toward the ranch entrance, I saw that things had changed. The old wooden gate had been replaced with a grand iron gate, custom fabricated, with a letter M worked into the design. For Monroe, I supposed, or maybe for Melissa. The farmhouse had been freshly painted white. There was expensive outdoor furniture on the wraparound porch. A new swimming pool had been installed in the side yard. Too late. Model SUV were parked in the circular driveway. I parked my truck off to the side and walked toward the barn. The ranch was busy. There were several workers moving about, mucking stalls, carrying feed, grooming horses. Men in worn work clothes, doing the quiet labor that makes a ranch run. And there was Daniel, my son. He was shoveling manure from a stall, dressed in jeans and rubber boots, a sweat-stained shirt, a feed company cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked tired. He looked different from the last time I had seen him. I walked up to the fence. "Excuse me," I said. Daniel looked up. He looked right at me, and I watched his eyes move over my face, my plain, old, unshaven face, and find nothing there. No recognition, no flash of familiarity. "Nothing. Can I help you?" he said, polite, distant, the voice he used for strangers. I stood very still. I was just passing through. I said, "Beautiful property." "Thank you," he said, and went back to his work. I stood there for another moment, watching my son shovel manure on the ranch I had bought for him, while he treated me like a man he had never met in his life. Then I walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time. I did not cry. I was past crying. I took out my phone and called Helen Graves. "Helen," I said. "Gerald, how are you?" "It's time," I said. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." A pause. "Then we'll begin," she said. What followed over the next 3 months was quiet and methodical. Helen and her team worked carefully and thoroughly. I made several trips to her office. I reviewed documents, signed papers, had long conversations about what I wanted and what I intended. I also did something else. I began keeping records. Every call I had made to Daniel that went unanswered. Every voicemail I had left that received no response. Every holiday that had passed without a visit. Every time I had contributed money or resources to the ranch or to their life, with the date, the amount, and my notes about the conversation. I wasn't doing this out of bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I was doing it because I needed clarity. For myself as much as anything. I needed to see, laid out plainly before me, what the relationship had actually been. Not the version I had told myself, the real version. The real version was painful to look at. I had given my son a ranch worth $3.2 million. In the 2 years since, he had visited me twice, both times related to paperwork or ranch business. He had not visited his mother in the last year of her life. He had not called on my birthday. He had not answered the phone on the night I called him, 2 days before Patricia passed, to tell him she wasn't doing well. He had looked at me, his father, the man who had raised him, who had given him everything, and he had not known my face. I closed the folder. I made myself a cup of tea, and then I went back to living my life. Part 10. The letter arrives. It was a Thursday morning in December when Daniel received the certified letter. Helen told me later that he had called her office within an hour of signing for it. The letter was simple and professional. It informed Daniel that, as part of a comprehensive review of my estate and holdings, it had been determined that the property deed transferring the ranch to Daniel Monroe contained irregularities that required legal resolution. The letter further stated that an independent appraisal and title review had been initiated, and that Daniel would need to appear with representation to discuss the matter. Daniel called my phone. I let it ring. He called again. I picked up on the third call. Dad. His voice was tight, controlled. I got a letter from your lawyer. I know. I said. What's going on? What irregularities? The deed was clean. You handled everything. Daniel. I said. Helen will explain everything. She's expecting your call. Dad, talk to me. What is this about? I was quiet for a moment. Do you know what I was thinking about this morning? I said. I was thinking about the summer you were 11. We drove out to the lake, just the two of us, and we fished all day. You caught a bass about this big. I stopped. He couldn't see my hands, a good size. You were so proud. Your mother took a photograph and kept it on the refrigerator for years. Silence on the line. Dad, call Helen, Daniel. I hung up. Helen had arranged for us to meet at her offices. Professional, neutral ground. Daniel arrived with Melissa and their attorney, a polished young man from an Austin firm named Bradley something or other. I arrived alone. I wore my brown jacket, my old boots. We sat across from each other at a long conference table. Daniel's face was tight with anxiety. Melissa's jaw was set in that firm, controlled way she had. She glanced at my clothes and then looked away. Helen began. She explained that I had initiated a full legal review of my estate. She explained that certain gifts, transfers, and contributions made over the preceding years were being reassessed in light of new estate planning decisions. What does that mean? Melissa said. Her voice was sharp. It means, Helen said calmly, that my client has made some changes. Bradley leaned forward. The ranch deed is clean. It was a gift properly transferred, fully documented. There are no irregularities. You are correct. Helen said, there are no irregularities with the deed. The ranch is Daniel's. That transfer stands. Daniel let out a breath. However, Helen continued, and I watched the word land in the room like a stone dropped in still water. My client has made significant revisions to his will, his investment accounts, his business holdings, and all other assets in his estate. Melissa went very still. Mr. Monroe, Helen said, turning to me, would you like to share anything at this point? I looked at my son. My son looked at me, and for the first time in a very long time, he was really looking at me, not through me, not past me, at me. I visited the ranch in September. I said quietly, I came to see how things were going. I wasn't announced, I just came. Daniel frowned slightly. I spoke to one of the workers near the barn. I said, I complimented the property. A pause. That worker was me, Daniel. I watched it move across his face. Confusion first, then realization, then something that looked like pain. You walked right past me. I said, you looked me in the eye, and you did not know me, your father, the man who has loved you every day of your life. The room was very quiet. I'm not telling you this to shame you, I said. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what I understood that day. How far we had come from where we started. How lost we had gotten. Melissa started to say something. Helen raised one hand, gently but firmly, and Melissa stopped. Your mother died? I said. And she never got her visit. She asked for you, Daniel. In the last year of her life, she asked for you. And you were busy with the ranch, with renovations, with life. Daniel's eyes were red. I don't blame you entirely, I said. I blame myself too. Maybe I gave too much and asked for too little. Maybe I made it too easy to take what I offered and move on. That's a failure of mine as a father. I folded my hands on the table, but I am your father, and I deserve to be known. Helen slid a document across the table. Bradley picked it up. His eyes scanned it. Something changed in his expression. Melissa reached over and took the document from him. I watched her read it. I had restructured my estate completely. The ranch remained Daniel's. I would not take back what I had given. But everything else, the investment accounts, the land holdings, the commercial properties, the trust funds I had quietly established over 30 years, had been redirected. To charity, to a foundation I had established in Patricia's name, to Earl's grandchildren's education fund, because Earl had been more family to me in recent years than my own family had been. The total value of what was not going to Daniel was something Melissa had likely been counting on. Something very significant. Melissa set the document down. Her hands were not entirely steady. "You can't," she started. "It is entirely within my rights," I said. "Everything I've given Daniel is his. I would not dream of taking any of it back. But what I choose to do with the rest of my life and my resources, that is my decision." Bradley was whispering something to Melissa. She shook her head sharply. Daniel hadn't moved. He was sitting very still, staring at the table. "Daniel," I said. He looked up. "I didn't do this to punish you," I said. "I did it because I realized something. Money that is given without relationship behind it isn't love. It's just money, and I don't want to be a man who buys love. I never did." I paused. I just wanted to be known by my son. Daniel put his head in his hands, and then he did something I did not expect. He wept, not the polished, controlled grief I had seen at the funeral, real weeping, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and honest. "Dad," he said, his voice broken. "I didn't," he stopped. "Tried again. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Melissa put her hand on his arm, but he moved it aside gently and stood up from his chair and walked around the table and stood before me. He was taller than me by several inches. He had his mother's eyes. "I didn't recognize you," he said. "I looked right at you, and I didn't recognize my own father." "I know," I said. "How did I let that happen?" I looked up at my son. "That," I said quietly, "is the question worth asking." The meeting ended. Bradley and Melissa left first quickly, in the way people leave rooms when they have nothing left to negotiate. Daniel and I walked out together into the pale December afternoon. We stood in the parking lot for a while, not quite ready to separate. "Can we get coffee?" he said. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." We found a diner around the corner. We sat in a booth by the window. The waitress brought us 2 coffees without being asked, the way good diners do. We talked for 2.5 hours. It was the longest conversation we had had since he was in his 20s. Daniel told me things I had not known. That Melissa had always been uncomfortable with how I lived with my simplicity, my old clothes, my modest house. That she had spent years quietly building a picture of me as someone to be managed rather than loved. That she had told Daniel on multiple occasions that your father is fine. He has his own life. We don't need to baby him. He told me he had believed it because it was easier to believe than the alternative. "What alternative?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "That I was choosing convenience over you," he said. "That I had become someone Mom would be ashamed of." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. "Your mother," I said, "loved you completely and without condition. That never changed, not for a single day." He nodded, but couldn't speak for a moment. "I missed her," he said. "I kept telling myself I'd visit when things settled down, and then things don't settle down." I said, "Life doesn't stop to let us catch up on what we've neglected. It just moves forward." He looked at me. "What happens now, Dad, now?" I said, I suppose we decide if we want to be in each other's lives, not because of what either of us can offer, not because of the ranch or the estate or any of it, but because we're father and son. I want that, he said, if you'll let me. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. His hand was big now, a man's hand, but I still remembered it small, curled in mine, walking through the Oklahoma fields all those years ago. You're my son, I said. That's not something that goes away. I will not tell you that everything became simple after that. It did not. Melissa was furious about the estate changes. There were tense months. Bradley sent several letters. Helen responded to each of them calmly and thoroughly, but something else was happening in that house. Daniel was changing. He called me every Sunday evening. He started showing up at things, my neighbor Earl's retirement party, a charity event I attended, small things. He started just showing up. One Sunday he drove up to my house alone, without Melissa. He brought a grocery bag with the ingredients for his mother's chicken pot pie, which I had not realized he even knew how to make. We made it together in my kitchen and ate it at the same kitchen table where he had grown up. We didn't talk about money or lawyers or estate plans. We talked about Patricia, about his childhood, about the bass he caught at the lake when he was 11. He wanted to know everything, every small memory I had saved. He was rebuilding something, collecting pieces. As for Melissa, I will say only this. People are more complicated than the roles we cast them in. She had her own fears and her own wounds that had nothing to do with me. In time, I believe she came to see that her strategy, if you can call it that, had cost her something too. It had cost her a husband who was fully present, because a man who has lost his relationship with his father carries a weight that sits between him and everyone else. I do not know if we will ever be close, Melissa and I, but we are civil, and we are honest, and that is a beginning. I want to tell you what I learned from all of this, because this story is not really about a ranch or a deed or an estate. It is about a much simpler and more painful thing. It is about what happens when we stop seeing the people who love us. I am 67 years old. My back aches, and my truck needs new tires, and sometimes I talk to Patricia in the evenings when the house is quiet, even though I know she can't answer me. But I am not alone. My son calls me every Sunday. Last month, he brought the children, Luca and Sophie. They spent the weekend. Luca followed me around the yard asking me about everything, every tool, every plant, every bird at the feeder. Sophie fell asleep on the couch watching cartoons, and Daniel carried her upstairs without waking her, and I watched him do it and thought, there he is. There's the boy I raised. I showed Luca how to fish at a small pond near my house. He caught nothing all afternoon, but he was completely happy. He held the rod with total seriousness and watched the water with great patience. Grandpa, he said at one point, how long do we wait? As long as it takes, I said. He nodded like that was perfectly reasonable. I think about that a lot, as long as it takes. Love is patient in a way that nothing else is. It waits. It endures silences. It absorbs hurt. It keeps the door open long past the point when pride would have slammed it shut. But it is also honest. It does not pretend that hurt did not happen. It does not buy peace with silence when truth is what's needed. I should have spoken sooner. I know that now. I should have said, years ago, Daniel, I miss you. Daniel, your mother needs you. Daniel, what is happening to us? Instead, I was too quiet, too patient, too willing to absorb. We both made mistakes, my son and I. The difference is that we found each other before it was too late. If you are watching this, and you have a parent who is getting older, a mother who calls too often, a father who seems too quiet, I need you to hear me. Go see them, not when it's convenient, not when things slow down, not at the holidays if you can manage it. Go now, take the drive, make the call, sit at the kitchen table and eat the food they make for you, and listen to the stories you've heard 100 times. Because one day, one ordinary Tuesday morning, those stories will end, and you will never get another one. Your parents are people, full, complicated, loving, sometimes frustrating, irreplaceable people. They are not a resource, They are not an estate to be managed. They are not a problem to be handled at a convenient time. They are the people who knew you when you were small and afraid. They are the people who rebuilt science projects at midnight and sat by the lake all day and drove long roads through Oklahoma talking about life. They deserve to be known, and you deserve the kind of relationship that no amount of money can buy, the kind where someone looks at you across a diner table and says, "You're my son." That's not something that goes away. Don't wait for a lawyer's letter to wake you up. Don't wait until your father is standing at a fence on the ranch you were given, and you look right through him like a stranger. Don't wait until a Tuesday morning when it's too late. The ranch, the money, the estate, all of it means nothing if the people you love don't know your face. Be known, and know the ones who love you, before the tide goes out too far to call back.